3 men from my past walked back into my life the same night. The golden heir who once swore I was his future. The best friend who always promised to protect me. And the rival, the one who made my life a war, who smiled every time I bled. I thought I'd escaped them. I thought I was free. But at the gala, under glittering lights, they all appeared. The heir reached for me like no time had passed, his voice warm, his smile perfect. The best friend stepped in close, steady, safe, the way he always was. And then there was him. Gray. Standing across the room, cold eyes locked on mine, a glass of whiskey in hand. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just watched me, like a predator watching prey. When he finally walked over, the crowd seemed to part for him. So, he said softly, his smirk razor sharp, you crawled back after all. Couldn't resist, could you? My breath caught. He was the one I swore I'd never let close again, the one I hated most. And yet his words, his presence, set my pulse racing faster than either of the others ever could. The heir's hand brushed mine, the best friend's arm hovered near my back, but it was Gray's gaze that burned into me, steady, dangerous, like he already owned me. I should have walked away. I should have chosen safety, charm, anything but him. But when the whispers in the room rose, when the weight of every stare pressed against me, it wasn't their warmth I felt. It was his shadow at my side. And then he leaned in, close enough that only I could hear. His lips barely moved as he whispered the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. Careful, Gray whispered against my ear, the brush of his breath making me shiver despite the anger flooding my chest. This room will eat you alive if you don't stand taller. My pulse spiked, not just from his words but from the way he said them, low, deliberate, like a warning only he was entitled to give. For years he had cut me down, mocked me, made me believe I would never belong, and now he was the one telling me to stand tall? I turned to face him, forcing myself not to flinch when our eyes locked. He looked the same as I remembered, sharp jaw, storm gray eyes that saw too much, and that impossible air of control. I hated him. I wanted to hate him. But the heat in my chest betrayed me. I don't need your advice, I hissed, stepping back. His smirk barely twitched. Then consider it a reminder. The heir, Daniel, immediately moved between us, glaring at Gray like he'd done 1,000 times before. Haven't changed, have you? Still poisoning everything you touch. His voice was laced with disdain, protective and possessive at once. She doesn't need you. Behind him, Mark, my once best friend, placed a hand on my arm, calm and steady. Let's not do this here. She doesn't need a scene. But Gray only chuckled, low and humorless, his gaze never leaving mine. She doesn't need me, he murmured, but she can't seem to stop looking at me either. The gall of him made my cheeks burn, but worse than that was the part of me that knew he was right. Because as Daniel whispered promises of the future he once painted for me, and Mark offered me the safety I could always fall back on, it was Gray's steady, unyielding stare that held me still. It infuriated me. It unnerved me. And yet, as the night dragged on, I felt him everywhere, the brush of his gaze on my back, the way the crowd shifted around him, the pull I had sworn I would never feel again. Daniel stayed at my side most of the evening, his smile never faltering, his hand brushing mine whenever the moment allowed. He spoke of plans, of legacies, of how the years apart hadn't changed what he wanted for us. His words were smooth, flawless, as if rehearsed, and maybe that was why they didn't land the way they once would have. There was a time when hearing him talk about our future would have melted me. Now it only felt heavy, like a weight I wasn't sure I wanted. Mark was quieter, his presence less demanding but no less constant. He reminded me of all the times he'd been there when no one else was, the nights I cried on his shoulder, the days he shielded me from Gray's cruel remarks when we were younger. He asked about my life since I'd left, about the work I'd done, about my dreams. With Mark, it was never about what I could give him, it was about what he could offer me. Stability. Safety. A kind of love I didn't doubt was real. But safety had never made my heart race. And it was racing now, for all the wrong reasons. Because no matter how close Daniel stood, no matter how gentle Mark was, it was Gray I kept catching out of the corner of my eye. He didn't hover. He didn't insert himself. He didn't need to. He stood at the edge of the room, cold and unreadable, and yet his gaze never strayed from me. When I left, when I frowned, when Daniel leaned in too close, I felt Gray's stare sharpen. Every glance was like a challenge, like he was daring me to acknowledge the truth I didn't want to face, that he had always gotten under my skin in ways I never understood. When I finally tried to slip away for a moment of air, it wasn't Daniel or Mark who followed. It was Gray. I felt him before I saw him, the shift in the air, the prickle at the back of my neck. Running already? His voice was quiet, smooth, almost amused. I turned sharply, my dress brushing against the balcony rail. I'm not running. His smirk deepened, though his eyes weren't mocking. They were searching, like he was peeling me apart layer by layer. Good, he said softly. Because I don't like chasing what doesn't want to be caught. The word struck something deep, something I wasn't ready to admit. My throat tightened, my mind screamed at me to push him away, but my body betrayed me again. I stayed rooted where I was, staring at him, unable to move. Daniel's laughter echoed from inside the ballroom, Mark's calm voice weaving through the crowd, but none of it reached me. All I heard was Gray. All I felt was the dangerous thrum in my chest that told me I was in trouble. And for the first time that night, I realized I might not escape him again. Gray didn't step closer, but his presence pressed against me like a storm rolling in. I gripped the balcony rail tighter, forcing myself to look away, but the city lights below blurred, my focus pulled back to him like a tether I couldn't cut. He leaned one shoulder against the doorway, hands in his pockets, casual in a way that felt rehearsed, deliberate. Everything about him screamed control, and yet beneath it was something raw, something dangerous, something that reached me no matter how hard I fought it. You always did hate crowded rooms, he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. It wasn't a jab, not the way I expected. It was a statement, one that sounded like he remembered. The truth caught in my throat. He remembered. I tried to steady my breathing. And you always did love making people miserable. His smirk returned, sharp and fleeting. Not people. Just you. My chest tightened at the honesty of it. He wasn't even pretending. He said it like it was fact, like it was carved into his bones. My stomach twisted, anger and something far more dangerous tangling together. You haven't changed. His eyes narrowed just enough to make my pulse stumble. Haven't I? My mind spun. He was supposed to be cold, cruel, untouchable. But now there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't name. I hated the way it made me feel, off balance, vulnerable. Before I could push back, Daniel's voice cut through the air. There you are. He stepped onto the balcony with a smile that looked brighter under the moonlight. His hand brushed mine as he leaned in close, his tone warm and easy. I was starting to think you'd vanished. I forced a smile, but the weight of Gray's gaze behind me burned hotter than the night air. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he ignored it. He kept talking, painting the future he saw for us with words that should have reassured me. Instead, they only pressed against me like a cage. My chest ached with the urge to breathe, but every inhale carried Gray's silence at my back. Mark joined a moment later, ever the peacemaker. His presence was steady, grounding, his hand brushing my arm with quiet reassurance. Don't let them crowd you, he murmured. Take your time. His kindness was real, undeniable. But it didn't drown out the way Gray finally moved, stepping past Daniel with a look that dared him to protest. He didn't say anything else, not to me, not to them. He just walked back into the gala, his shadow swallowing the light as he disappeared into the crowd. My heart didn't slow even after he was gone. Hours later, when I left, I found him again, waiting by the car I hadn't called. The driver bowed quickly and vanished, leaving me alone with Gray in the cool night air. He opened the door, his expression unreadable. Get in. The words weren't a request. They weren't even an order. They were a challenge, and I knew it. My breath shook as I met his gaze, as every warning bell in my head screamed at me to run. But my hand moved before my mind could catch up. I slid into the car. Gray followed, his shoulder brushing mine as the door shut, sealing us in. The silence was suffocating, thick with everything we hadn't said. And then, as the car pulled away, he finally broke it. "You think you hate me," he said softly, almost like it was a secret. "But you don't." "Not really." I turned to him, furious, desperate, terrified he might be right. "And what makes you so sure?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because I don't hate you either. Not anymore." My chest locked, my throat dry, because for the first time since the night began, Gray's voice didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like a confession. The car ride felt endless, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows while the silence between us grew heavier with every passing second. My heart was hammering, but not from fear, at least not the kind I wanted to admit. Gray sat next to me, composed as ever, one hand resting against the leather seat, the other loosening his tie as if the weight of the night finally pressed against him. He didn't look at me. Not once. And that was somehow worse. I should have demanded to be let out, told him to stop the car, called Daniel or Mark or anyone else who could remind me who I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to want. But instead, I sat frozen, my hands clenched against the folds of my dress, my mind caught on the words he'd left me with. He didn't hate me. Not anymore. It shouldn't have mattered. Gray had never been the one I wanted. He had been my enemy, the rival who twisted every kindness into a trap, who stood against me at every turn, who made sure I always knew my place. But as the silence dragged on, it wasn't the cruelty I remembered, it was the sharp way he saw me when no one else did. He broke it first, of course. He always did. "Tell me," he said, his voice low, cutting through the hum of the engine. "Why did you come back? After all this time, after leaving everything behind, why step back into this world?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my nails biting into my palms. "Does it matter to you?" His eyes flicked to mine, quick and piercing, then away again. "It matters more than it should." The honesty of it startled me more than if he'd mocked me. Gray didn't offer truths. He never had. And yet, there it was, quiet, unpolished, real. I turned to face him fully, desperate to hold on to my anger, my armor. "I came back because I was tired of running. Because I deserve to stand in the same rooms as all of you without feeling like I don't belong. That's it. Don't read more into it than that." For a moment, something flickered in his gaze, something I couldn't place. Then he leaned back, letting out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, wasn't quite a sigh. "That's exactly what I expected you to say." The car stopped outside my apartment, the driver already stepping out to open the door, but Gray caught my wrist before I could move. His touch was firm, grounding, the warmth of it searing through me. I froze, my breath caught. His eyes met mine, sharp and steady. "Stay out of Daniel's shadow. And don't let Mark make you forget who you are." My heart stuttered. "And what about you?" His lips curved, faint and unreadable. "I'll make sure you don't forget me." Then he released me, sliding out of the car first, his hand brushing mine only long enough to steady me as I followed. He didn't linger. He didn't wait for a thank you. He just walked away into the night, leaving me standing there with a storm in my chest. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of meetings, whispers, and invitations I couldn't escape. Daniel was relentless, charming as ever, his presence always loud enough to drown out the doubts he didn't want me to have. He sent flowers, left messages, reminded me of promises we once made under softer lights, younger hearts. Mark was quieter, his approach gentler, but no less constant. He was always there when I needed grounding, when the pressure of returning threatened to crush me. His words were careful, his touch steady, and every time he looked at me, I saw the weight of the years we had shared. And yet, it wasn't their voices that haunted me when I closed my eyes at night. It was Gray's. Stay out of Daniel's shadow. Don't let Mark make you forget. I hated how those words followed me, how his gaze still lingered in the corners of my mind. It wasn't until the charity gala 2 nights later that everything snapped. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, filled with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. Daniel was by my side, his hand steady at the small of my back as he introduced me to investors, patrons, people who spoke to me like I had never left. For the first time, I felt almost steady. Almost. Until I saw Gray across the room. He wasn't looking at me, not at first. He was speaking with a group of older men, his posture commanding, his suit immaculate, his presence enough to make the entire room feel smaller. But then his eyes lifted, and they found me instantly, like he'd known I was there the whole time. The air shifted. My pulse tripped. I told myself to look away, but I didn't. Couldn't. And then another man appeared, an investor I'd spoken with briefly once before, charming, sharp, too eager. He leaned in close, brushing his hand against mine as he laughed, his smile too wide, his voice too smooth. Daniel was distracted, Mark too far across the room, and suddenly I was cornered in a conversation I didn't want. I tried to step back, but the man only leaned closer, his hand hovering just at my elbow. It wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it was presumptuous, invasive. I opened my mouth to cut him off, and then I felt it. A shift in the air behind me. The investor froze, his smile faltering as his eyes darted over my shoulder. I turned slowly, already knowing who I'd find. Gray. He stood close enough that the warmth of his body brushed against mine, his hand resting lightly but firmly at the curve of my waist. His eyes never left the man in front of me, sharp and unyielding, his voice calm but laced with steel. She's not interested. The investor stammered, his face paling as he glanced between us, before mumbling an excuse and retreating into the crowd. My breath caught, my body trembling with the weight of Gray's touch, his claim staked so effortlessly, so boldly, in front of everyone. I should have pulled away. I should have told him off. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, as his hand lingered just a moment longer before he leaned down, his lips brushing the edge of my ear. You really should be more careful, he murmured. Not everyone knows how to take no for an answer. My chest ached with confusion, my mind spinning with every contradiction he embodied. Cold, cruel, dangerous, and yet in that moment, he was the only one who had stepped in. The only one who saw. When I finally pulled away, forcing myself to put space between us, his eyes followed me through the crowd. No matter where I went, who I spoke to, I felt them, steady, relentless, burning into me with a truth I wasn't ready to face. Gray, the one I swore I hated, the one I swore I'd never fall for, was unraveling me piece by piece. And the worst part was, he knew it. The rest of the night played out like a performance, and I was caught in the middle of it. Daniel's charm circled me like a golden cage, his arm looping around my waist, his smile painting the picture of a perfect couple. Mark was steady and protective in the background, making sure I never looked cornered, but it wasn't his gaze that unsettled me, it was Gray's. He never approached again after sending the investor away, but every time I lifted my eyes, I found him. He didn't try to hide it. His stare was unflinching, the kind of gaze that made my pulse trip no matter how hard I tried to steady myself. I felt it when I danced with Daniel, when Mark brushed my arm to lead me to another conversation, when laughter rang in my ear but none of it sank into my chest. His silence was louder than the music. I left earlier than expected, claiming fatigue, and Daniel offered to take me home but I refused. I needed space, needed air, needed to think without the weight of everyone's expectations pressing against me. The car pulled up to my apartment, and I thought the night was finally mine, until I stepped out and saw him leaning against the railing near the entrance, his suit jacket undone, his tie loose, as if he had been waiting. Gray. My breath hitched but I refused to show it. Are you following me now? I asked, trying for sharpness though my voice trembled. His eyes lifted, dark and unyielding. If I was, you wouldn't notice. The words made my chest tighten, not because they scared me but because I knew he was right. He didn't move toward me, didn't make a scene, just stood there in the cool night air, watching me like he was trying to read everything I wasn't saying. I hated that part of me wanted him to try. "You had no right," I forced out, my voice rising, my nails biting into my palms. "At the gala, you can't just step in like that and what?" His voice cut in, quiet but sharp enough to slice the space between us. "Stop someone from putting their hands on you? You can't call that protection when you didn't ask for it, is that it?" My throat closed because yes, that was exactly what I should have said. But what came out instead was weaker, more raw. "You don't get to act like you care." His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing just enough to make my heart lurch. He stepped forward then, closing the space between us in 2 deliberate strides until he was close enough for me to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Don't I?" My chest heaved, my mind screamed at me to push him back, but my body betrayed me, frozen, caught in the pull of his voice, his nearness. His eyes searched mine, not cruel, not mocking, something else entirely, something I couldn't allow myself to name. The silence stretched, unbearable, until he finally broke it with words that landed like a strike. "You can lie to them. You can lie to yourself. But you don't get to lie to me." My breath shook as I tried to hold his gaze, tried not to crumble under the weight of it. "And what exactly do you think I'm lying about?" His lips curved into the faintest smirk, but there was no humor in it, only conviction. "That you don't feel this." He didn't touch me, not yet, but his presence pressed against me like gravity itself, and for one terrifying, intoxicating second, I couldn't breathe because he was right. I broke away before he could see it in my eyes, forcing myself to move, to fumble for my keys and push past him like his words hadn't just split me open. "Good night, Gray," I said, the syllables sharp, final, but my voice betrayed me with its tremor. He didn't stop me. He just watched, and somehow that was worse than anything else. Inside, the silence of my apartment pressed down on me. I dropped my purse, leaned against the door, and let out the breath I'd been holding since the moment his hand brushed my waist at the gala. My mind spun with the images I couldn't shake, his stare across the ballroom, his voice cutting into the night, the certainty in his tone when he accused me of lying. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to bury the truth beneath layers of anger and resentment. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt the warmth of him standing too close, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He had seen through me, and I didn't know how to forgive him for that. Days passed, but they were anything but normal. Daniel kept calling, leaving messages filled with charm and promises. Mark dropped by with quiet concern, his steady presence reminding me of everything safe and familiar. And then there was Gray. He didn't appear in obvious ways. He didn't call. He didn't leave flowers. But he was there, woven into every moment. At meetings, his gaze flickered to mine, unreadable but heavy enough to make my pulse quicken. At dinners, his remarks cut sharper when I tried to ignore him, his silence louder when I pretended not to notice. And when I walked into the office late one night to pick up files, he was already there, leaning against the desk with his sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded, like he had been waiting though he'd never admit it. I froze in the doorway, files clutched tight against my chest. "Working late?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His eyes lifted, dark and deliberate. Or maybe I was waiting. My throat tightened. For what? He pushed away from the desk, crossing the room with slow, unhurried steps until he stood inches from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "For you to stop pretending," he said quietly. My chest constricted, my breath stuttering as his words sank in. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to claim he was wrong. But the truth clawed at my throat, raw and undeniable. Before I could speak, his hand brushed mine, not a claim this time but something softer, almost hesitant. And then he said the one thing that shattered every wall I had left. "You're not the only one who fell." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through every defense I had built around myself. I wanted to believe I misheard, that Gray's voice hadn't softened, that his gaze hadn't flickered with something dangerously close to vulnerability. But he stood there, unflinching, waiting, as if daring me to call him a liar. My heartbeat thrashed in my chest. "You don't mean that," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "You don't feel anything." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he'd retreat into that cold shell I'd always known. Instead, he leaned closer, so close I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the storm buried in his eyes. "I've spent years making sure I didn't," he murmured, his tone almost broken, almost human. "And yet here I am, breaking every rule I swore I'd never touch. For you." The room spun. My grip on the files faltered, paper sliding to the floor like snow as his words sank into me, too heavy to carry and too sharp to ignore. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice trembling. His gaze flickered over my face, searching, measuring. "Because if I don't, Daniel will think he has a chance. And I'd rather burn everything down than watch you choose him." His honesty seared me, left me gasping. There it was. The jealousy, the claim, the truth he'd tried to bury under control and cruelty. And yet beneath it was something else, something he couldn't hide anymore. Fear. Fear of losing me. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at the screen and froze. "Daniel." Gray's eyes dropped to the phone, his mouth hardening. "Answer it," he said, but the challenge in his tone made it clear, he wanted me to. I hesitated, then slid the phone back into my bag without a word. His jaw eased, his shoulders relaxing in a way I'd never seen before, like my silence had been its own answer. And in that moment, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding, the truth that terrified me more than anything else. Gray wasn't the man I thought he was. He was worse. He was better. He was everything I swore I'd never want, and the only one I couldn't walk away from. I didn't sleep that night. Gray's words circled me like chains, pulling tighter each time I tried to shake them off. "You're not the only one who fell." I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than a moment, an impulse, something he'd regret in the morning. But when I walked into the office the next day, he was already there. He didn't say it again. He didn't have to. His eyes told me everything. It wasn't just a slip, it was real, and he wasn't going to take it back. Daniel, of course, didn't make things easier. By the afternoon, I received an invitation, a dinner at his penthouse, intimate, just us catching up. The words made my stomach twist. I should have ignored it, but part of me wanted clarity, wanted to prove that I was still in control of my choices. So I went. Daniel greeted me with that same easy smile, the kind that used to make me feel safe, but now it felt too polished, too practiced. Over dinner he spoke about our past as if it was unfinished, as if picking up where we left off was inevitable. I sipped my wine and pretended to listen, all while Gray's voice echoed in the back of my head. By the time I left, my chest felt heavier than when I arrived. And then, as I stepped out of Daniel's building, I froze. A black car was parked across the street, engine running, headlights cutting through the night. And there he was, Gray, leaning against the car with a look that made my pulse stop. He had followed me. My feet carried me forward before my brain could stop them. "Are you serious?" I demanded, crossing the street and ignoring the burn in my chest. "You're stalking me now?" He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. His gaze dropped to the faint trace of wine on my lips, then lifted back to my eyes. "I'm making sure you get home safe." I scoffed, heat rushing to my cheeks. "That's not your job." His jaw tightened. "It is now." He opened the car door, a silent command. I wanted to refuse, to walk away and prove I wasn't under his control. But the truth? I was tired of fighting. So I got in. The drive was silent at first, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. I stared out the window, willing my heartbeat to slow, but it only grew louder when he finally spoke. "Do you really think he deserves you?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. I turned to him, anger flaring. "And what makes you think you do?" The question landed like a strike. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale, but his voice didn't waver. "Because I see you. All of you. And I'm not afraid of what it means." My chest constricted, every breath sharp and uneven. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But the truth clawed its way out in a whisper I couldn't stop. "Then why does it feel like you'll ruin me?" His eyes flicked to mine, dark and unyielding, before returning to the road. "Because I probably will. But you'll ruin me first." My breath caught, the air between us igniting in a silence more dangerous than any words. And when the car finally stopped outside my apartment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. I sat frozen in the passenger seat, my hand gripping the door handle, but I couldn't bring myself to move. His words still burned through me like fire I couldn't put out. "You'll ruin me first." I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as another one of Gray's cruel little games, but there was no mockery in his voice, no smirk on his face. He said it like it was the most terrifying truth he'd ever admitted, and the weight of it pinned me in place. My chest ached with the need to speak, to demand what exactly he meant, but when I turned, his eyes caught mine, and every word I thought I had dissolved on my tongue. He wasn't guarded. He wasn't cold. He was raw, stripped bare in a way I had never seen him before, and it scared me more than his arrogance ever had. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped out, the cool air hitting my skin like a slap, forcing me to breathe. I didn't look back, but I felt his gaze on me until I disappeared inside. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his clenched jaw, the way his voice cracked on the edges of control, the storm in his eyes when he said I'd ruin him. By morning, I thought I'd managed to lock it all away, but fate had other plans. When I walked into the office, the first thing I heard was the sound of voices, sharp, clipped, and heated. I followed the noise and stopped dead in the hall. Gray and Daniel, facing off in the boardroom. The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on, as if the walls themselves couldn't contain the weight of their rivalry. Daniel's voice cut through first. "You think you can intimidate her into choosing you? Into forgetting what we had?" His fists clenched at his sides, his carefully controlled smile slipping into something darker. Gray stood across from him, calm but lethal, his tone colder than ice. "What you had is gone. She's not the same girl you toyed with, and you're not the man she thinks she needs. Stop pretending you matter." My breath caught, heat rising in my cheeks as both men turned toward me at once. Gray's gaze pinned me in place, sharp and unwavering, while Daniel softened instantly, desperate. "You don't have to listen to him," Daniel said quickly, stepping closer. "He'll twist everything, he'll make you think you're trapped. But you're not. You have a choice." My pulse hammered so loudly I thought it would drown me. Two men, two versions of my past, standing before me, both demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Gray closed the distance between us, his hand brushing mine in a fleeting touch that stole the air from my lungs. His voice was low, meant only for me, but it echoed through every part of me. "Don't let him write your story. You know where you belong." My world tilted, the weight of their eyes crushing down on me. For the first time in my life, the choice wasn't just about them. It was about me, who I was willing to become, and who I would destroy in the process. And as silence swallowed the room, I realized the most dangerous truth of all. I was already his. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating, every second stretched thin like glass ready to shatter. Daniel's eyes were wild, his voice sharp as he tried to claw back ground that was already slipping from beneath him. "You think this is love?" he hissed at Gray, stepping forward with a sneer. "It's obsession. Control. He doesn't care about you, he cares about winning." His words sliced through me, but before I could even process them, Gray moved. He didn't raise his voice, didn't break his composure, but the power in his presence was undeniable. "Winning?" he repeated, his gaze locked on Daniel with a coldness that could freeze blood. Then his eyes shifted to me, softer now, vulnerable in a way that cut me open. If this was about winning, I would have walked away the moment I realized what she does to me. But I didn't. Because for once in my life, it's not about the empire. It's not about power. It's about her. My breath caught, the force of his words pulling me into a storm I wasn't ready for. Daniel's hand slammed against the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't fall for this," he spat. "You know what he's like. You know he'll break you." His desperation was louder than his confidence now, and the cracks in his perfect facade were finally showing. But before I could answer, before I could decide whose voice to follow, Gray stepped closer, closing the space between us. His hand brushed against mine, deliberate this time, his fingers curling just enough to ground me. His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than all of Daniel's fury combined. "Maybe I'll break," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But I won't break her." The world seemed to stop, every sound fading until all I could hear was the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw tight, but I barely saw him anymore. All I could see was Gray, the man who had built walls around his heart, only to tear them down for me. And that realization terrified me more than anything. Because it meant that no matter how much I tried to fight it, no matter how dangerous it was, the decision was already written. It was always going to be him. I didn't know how I got back to my office. My legs carried me through the hallways like I was sleepwalking, my pulse still thrumming in my ears after Gray's words had landed like a bomb in that boardroom. "I won't break her." No one had ever said anything like that to me before, not with that kind of conviction, not with that kind of weight. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself, but the room spun with too many truths colliding all at once. I'd spent so long convincing myself that Gray's coldness meant indifference, that his walls were impenetrable, that I was just a fleeting distraction he'd tire of when the game ended. But today I'd seen the cracks. And they weren't cracks of weakness, they were cracks of honesty, of a man who had lived his life buried under armor only to peel it away from me. And it terrified me. It terrified me because I knew what it meant. It meant I had already chosen him, long before I admitted it out loud. A knock at my door jolted me out of my spiral. "Daniel." His tie was loosened, his eyes wild, desperation etched into every line of his face. "You can't let him do this to you," he said, closing the door behind him as if trapping me in with his anger. "He'll consume you, ruin everything you've worked for. I know him. I know how he plays." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand tall even as my chest tightened. "And what about you, Daniel? What exactly were you doing all this time? Was it love? Or was it convenience?" He froze, his jaw clenching. For the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. "I cared about you," he said finally, his voice raw. "But you can't compare me to him. I would have given you safety. He'll only ever give you fire." My heart twisted, but before I could respond, the door opened again, and Gray walked in. His presence filled the room instantly, sharp and unyielding, his gaze cutting straight through Daniel before landing on me. "Get out," he said, his voice low, calm, dangerous. Daniel laughed bitterly. "You don't get to decide that." Gray didn't even flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not asking." The tension between them was unbearable, the air thick with unspoken threats, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to say something, to stop this before it spiraled, but then Gray's hand brushed against mine, subtle, steady, grounding me again. And in that moment, I knew. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that I was neutral, that I was untouched by the storm these men had brought into my life. My choice was already made, even if saying it out loud would change everything. I turned to Daniel, my voice quiet but firm. "You need to leave." His face fell, disbelief etched into every feature, but he didn't argue. He just shook his head, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and heartbreak, before storming out and slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Gray didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me like I was the only thing keeping him upright. My chest rose and fell unevenly as I met his gaze, and for once, I didn't look away. "You scare me," I whispered, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. His eyes softened, his jaw tightening. "You scare me too," he admitted. And then he closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my face with a gentleness I didn't think he was capable of. But I'm done running from it. The world outside the door no longer mattered. In that moment, it was just us, two broken people daring to risk everything in a fire that could either destroy us or forge us into something unshakable. And as his lips brushed against mine, I realized I didn't care which it would be.